Hey everybody, welcome back to the Personal Transformation Podcast. And today I'm joined by Rob Giardinelli. Rob is an expert on the importance of networking and finding ways to connect with people. We'll talk about the powers of introverts and extroverts in those events. But if you've read the book Personal Transformation Podcast, I talk about the positive power that your social circle has on your results. And actually we become, you may have heard of this, the average of the 5 people that we spend most of our time with. So carefully cultivating our social group and our social network is a really powerful way to change your results. So Rob, we're going to pick your brains on how do we do that in this episode. So welcome to the show.
Dan, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, like I said to you before this, I'm interested in this from the how do we change results perspective, but also I just moved to a new city. And so I actually need to build my own social circle and start to go through that kind of, right, meet people and connect and build these kind of connections. At the same time, the idea of going to all these networking events is kind of like, oh, do I have to go and do it? Like, I don't mind being social for a bit, but also part of me likes to just, kind of curl up on the sofa and put like a blanket around me and watch a movie or something along those lines. So I don't think I'm on my own on that. Like, I don't think everybody likes to go to social events and connect and really kind of be out there. So what's your take? How do you help people overcome this kind of disconnect with events and really start to build their social circle?
So, especially if you're moving to a new city, and I know you're in that boat. Not only are you coming, to a new city, you're coming from another country. I know that you're from UK, but you were in Prague most recently. So, I always like to say that cities are people with personalities, and you want to do your best to become friends with your city as a person and finding those things that you like. And I have found, I've lived in several different places in my life. I've lived in the city I live in now, Austin, for 20 years. And the best way for anyone to get involved who moves to a new city is to get involved. And the thing about networking is it's not just going to an event with your peers in your same industry. I can't tell you, I've gone to over 2,000, events over the last 15 years. Many of them have been in the nonprofit gala space. And there is a ton of business, there is a ton of connection that happens at them. So if you're, gosh, I don't want to go to a networking event, there are so many other ways that you can get involved in your community. You can join a board, you can join a committee, you can volunteer, you can, you can join a sports team if you wanted to. There are all kinds of different ways that you can get involved. So especially if you're a networking event novice or that's not necessarily what you want to do, when you go to another city, don't necessarily dive into that, because what can happen if you do dive into that route solely and strictly is your work life becomes your personal life. And it becomes very hard to disconnect those two things. And, we'll dive a little bit more deeply into conversation a little bit later on, but, you've got to be able to blend in anything you do, whether it's a business event or a personal, anything. You've got to blend the various aspects of your life in organic ways in order for that to happen. But really the first things first is get involved in your community in some way that feels comfortable for you. Because if you're not comfortable, it's going to be really hard for you. So find that things that that gives you the most comfort. Start there. Think of that like almost like a seed or a seed of a plant, and allow, the limbs and the fruit to bear itself out.
All right, cool. If I go back far enough, like I'm at that age where I used to go to the breakfast networking events. You remember I don't know, listeners will understand this, is you wake up at kind of the early hours of yesterday, I think it was, and you have to turn up and you get your coffee and you get your bacon roll and you have to listen to everybody pitching their business ideas, and you get like 5 seconds of time, and then it's like, oh, it just feels a little bit, sometimes in those situations, artificial. I think if you invest in those networks, the time invested in the network actually plays a role. But kind of to go day in, day out and kind of, here's my business, is what I do. I've definitely been that. So I didn't necessarily want to go that route. So I like your idea of thinking about community and how do we get involved in different ways. So that's really good, because again, it takes, I think, a special kind of person to be successful at those business networking events. You have to really like to kind of put on the the show. You have to be comfortable talking about how amazing you are, your businesses and stuff. And I don't think everybody's like that. And you mentioned before this, you talk about you work a lot with introverts. So is there a different way that introverts can network and grow their kind of social circle in a way that extroverts would?
Absolutely. And introverts are, for anyone who's an introvert, I want you to understand this. You are so important to any event. And I will tell you, in all the events I've gone to over the years, I have never been to a successful one that doesn't have a mix of extroverts and introverts. And think of an event like Earth, in that Earth has the right amount of oxygen for all of us to live here and survive here and thrive here. If you walk into a room and there is 120 extrovert or introverts, there is not enough oxygen in the room. And when there's not enough oxygen in the room, things tend to die. The opposite is true if you walk into a room with 120 extroverts. There's too much oxygen in the room. And when there's too much oxygen, things explode. That's kind of what happens in the nature of oxygen in a room. So first things first with introverts is know there's a place for you, because the extroverts need a place to dump their information. And there is this very common misperception out there that only extroverts are successful at events. Now, there are certain type of events where extroverts may be more successful than introverts, but there are plenty of events where introverts are going to be more successful than extroverts. One example that I always like to use is an industry conference. And if you think about an industry conference, it's less about growing sales as it is gathering intelligence. An extrovert is spending too much time talking. They're not getting the information. And the great thing about introverts is, and 70% of CEOs are introverts. So one of the reasons that they are so successful is they take in information and they listen. So, for anyone who's in a leadership role, look at your introverts who are curious people, because there's, if they're an introvert and curious, I can work with those people, or you can work with those people to tap into their existing strengths so that you wind up with a lot of information. And I'll cite a personal example here. So I've been with my husband now for 15 years, and I was in the tech industry for about a decade before I met him. And I didn't own a tux. I didn't have any of the essential tools. But what I learned very early on is my husband is very much an extrovert. Like, if you looked up extrovert in the dictionary, it'd be a photo of him, and I'm more of an introvert. And there were times where we go to 2 or 3 or sometimes even 4 things in a night. And when you're going from one thing to the other and you're in the car, what did you learn? And what I learned, maybe 6 months in was, I would say, I learned this, and this. And he'd turn to me and be like, we were there 45 minutes. How did you do that? And people they like to talk about themselves. And if you just ask questions, you will be amazed at what people will tell you. Like 2,000 events later, I am still, I'm never shocked anymore, because I've just seen too many things, but it still is just mind blowing how much information people are willing to share with you, whether they know you casually, really well, or just met you. Because sometimes it's easier to open up to a stranger than it is someone you really know, to share what they really think or what their innermost thoughts are.
That's really interesting. I have a similar dynamic with my wife. So I'm probably slightly more expert than she is, but we'll go to these events. And largely I work with salespeople. And one of the skills I really see is, for salespeople, is that ability to turn a conversation into, I think you said, a place for people to dump information. I love that topic, that kind of idea, is that we want people to share with us. We want people to share ideas. We want to be able to kind of get information or feelings or emotion or whatever it is in those conversations. And I think you're right. I think being able to obviously ask questions is good, but there's an energy that comes with being a little bit more introverted that actually allows people to open up in those spaces. So actually that's a really interesting dynamic that the two of you have got there, is that one of you is kind of going out like that and the other one is kind of bringing the information back.
Absolutely. And, it's fun to kind of observe. Like, I've always been fascinated with people. Like, I always have been, even though I'm an introvert. And that's kind of how I know there's a place for me at events, because I'm interested in people. But if I try to be the life of the party extrovert, one, it's going to come across as inauthentic, and two, it's going to really, really drain my energy really, really fast. And I don't want to do either of those things. And it just, when you're yourself, it is amazing how much more opportunity, information, connections, all those things just open up to you when you keep that in mind.
Okay, cool. So this is good, because I'm now starting to think, right, I actually need to go and build my network personally. But again, if I'm listening, then I want to be intentional with my network. I want to go and spend time around people who are going to challenge me and raise the level of the game that I play at. So if you were doing that, if you were, let's say, you're going to coach me, you're going to advise me, and I've got some ambitions, I want to become more successful, I want to raise my performance in business or fitness or whatever it is, how would you guide me? What would you say? Here's where you should go and find some events. These are some of the good ways to source opportunities to connect with people. And then one of the other challenges, I think, and I shouldn't ask too many questions at the same time, but we'll go with it anyway, is this idea that oftentimes as an individual going to these things, and if you go as a couple or if you go as a small group, it's quite easy because you can dynamic and bounce off each other, and you've always got someone to turn to. But if you turn up and it's just you with your little glass of champagne or whatever it is, you're just kind of looking around. So tips for how to do that as an individual if it's a new space.
So if it's a new space, this is what I recommend. If you don't know anybody, what I will always do when I walk into a room, and there's plenty of rooms I still walk into where I don't know anybody, especially because I frequently will go to events in other cities. What I will always do is scan the room. And if I'm not fully feeling the vibe of a room, what I will do is I will look around the room and I will find where all the bars are located. I will then go to the bar with the longest line. And the reason for that is that you've got someone in front of you and you will have somebody behind you. And it's a great way to start having conversations. And the goal of that is not so much to make connections or get a sale or establish a relationship. It's really about getting your feet wet. It's almost like, people who dip their toe in the pool before they jump in. It's very much about that. It's a good way for you to get a little bit more confidence. And you got to have a beverage, that's one of the things that you will do at just about any type of event. That gives you a way to kind of ease into it. It allows you to reduce your anxiety a little bit. It allows you to talk to somebody and, you each go on with your evening. And if you wind up, I would say for every 20 times it happens, there may be one out of those 20 times where I really am like, okay, let's go over here and chat. It doesn't happen very often, but you can at least find out why other people showed up there. Are they in different industries? Do they have the same type of job? Are there different types of jobs if you're within the same industry of a networking event that are there? You can get some really high level information and be like, okay, I didn't think about this before. And it's just your way of gathering information because, as I said earlier, and I can't say it enough, people love to talk about themselves.
It's I think the advice I used to give, because you're right, I think I like the idea of introvert, extrovert. I don't think it's purely on the personality type. I think there's the way I used to describe it is you have like bees or flies or something, and I tend to use bees because you'll see the opposite of it is you go to these networking events and there's always someone who wants to talk about themselves, and they go to a group and they kind of buzz around and they go to the next group and they're always bouncing from group to group. And the reason, like I said, bees, because the group is a flower. Right? If it's a fly, the group is something very different. But like I don't necessarily like those people. I don't like the people who come and they're overly me, let me tell you about everything that is. And that's the reason they bounce off, right? Because they tend to get kind of pushed away from that mini group. So I think what you're talking about is asking the question to be interested rather than trying to be interesting. So it's interesting. And I like the idea of scanning the area, trying to find those easy confidence builders. That's good. Is there a good place to find events? Because here's what I've done. I'll go on the internet and I'll try and turn up at these things, and like 3 people in an awkward space. But have you found a successful way of sourcing like really good events to go to?
So for me, I live in a city where the social scene and the philanthropy scene are very intertwined. So for me, I'm going to go to things where I know there's a popular event that's going to be there. So I'll tend to look for things like that. What I would say with events is most people with social media now, let that be your friend. Even if you're new to a city, there's probably one or two people in your network that you can meet up with. So go to LinkedIn, go to Facebook, go to Instagram, go to any of the other platforms, ask to meet that person for coffee. Use that as an opportunity. One, you're putting yourself out there with someone you probably don't know very well, if at all. And the worst thing that they can do is say no. The best thing that they can do is you meet for coffee, you wind up actually with a friend, or they take you, they take you somewhere. So really, before you even do that, I always like to set, like when I travel, I have a rule: live like a local. And it's very much the same thing. You want to meet with people who kind of are involved in the community. The other thing too, I can't stress enough why volunteering is important. If you are passionate about animals, find an animal nonprofit to do it. Just Google the largest animal, the animal shelter, and you'll find it. If you like the theater, find the largest theater and find a way to get involved and volunteer with that. That's a really easy way for you to get community right away with something that you care, about. And people who are bees are not people. I love that analogy, by the way. People who are bees, if you operate that way, people are not going to want to invest in you, because the one thing I have learned, if there was one, I'll say that probably many times, but this is really one of the top 5 or 10. People want to be seen. So if you are a bee, you are not seeing the other people, and they in turn will not open up to you. They will think you're, slimy. They'll think you're griftery. They'll think these things because it's going to just come across as very inauthentic at best and disingenuous at worst.
Yeah, no, there's definitely an ickiness when you meet these people, right? There's
all the time.
Not too many of them, but they do tend to get around. And if you go to the same events, you see them. It's like, I do hope that I am not one of those. But
well, the way that you can know is if you're going from person to person and the conversations are lasting. I always say at a networking event, you should never talk to anybody longer than 10 to 15 minutes at the absolute most, because they're there to networking, you're there to network. And if you're there to network, it means you need to meet a lot of people. And if you're having a conversation that's that in depth, you want to take that conversation offline, because you don't know who of your competitors may be around to overhear what you're talking about. You don't want the opportunity to be seen with somebody else and, your competitor feels insecure. You want to, establish a connection, show that you're interested to be, with them. And I like the interesting. And I always like to say, in order to be an interesting person, you have to be interested, and you have to be interested in others. And if you're a B, you're not doing that. And I know people that bounce around from person to person. If I'm going to 3 events in a night, I have 45 minutes. I'm probably only going to spend 3 to 5 minutes talking to each group of people, because I know that I need to do that. But I'm always going to them and saying, what is new with you? What is happening? Why are you here tonight? Who brought you? Like, I want to know about them. They'll give me the information. We can share. They feel seen. And when people feel seen, they feel more confident. And the confidence is what increases the energy of a room and makes an event more fun, because an event at the end of the day is energy. It's a feeling. And you want to make sure that you're, when you're doing that, and you do have to kind of, I guess, speed network or speed date, just keep in mind that, ask questions of the other person, let them be seen, give them the spotlight. And, if you're talking to an introvert, there's an interesting way that I have learned that you can tell whether someone's an introvert or whether someone is really disinterested, disengaged, bored, doesn't want to be there. Introverts will start with 1-word answers that become 3-word answers, that become sentences. They're just guiding into it, and they're not that comfortable talking about themselves. If someone's just doing a 1-word answer after 3 or 4 questions, end the conversation and go on, because that person doesn't want to engage with you. And there have been times that I've tried that. Like, I've had unique experiences where I've had to do that. They're fascinating and they're fun. I wouldn't want to do it every day, but I go to enough things that, if it happens, I'll try it, just because I want to try new techniques out to see if they work.
I love that. You always want to leave before it gets awkward, Right? That's the kind of thing, right? And I like that, being able to be aware that it's just not going well, and that's okay, right? Not everybody wants to talk to you. Not everyone necessarily wants to listen to you. We're not going to connect with everyone. We don't have to be liked by everyone. We need to kind of get that off as well. And I also like you mentioned there about finding groups, finding non-profits or organizations that you can connect with around your passion. So my mum she's a singer, right? I grew up listening to show tunes. I'm just as comfortable with 90s hip hop and rap as I am with Phantom of the Opera or Calamity Jane or something along those lines. So I like to say I'm diverse. But she has such a massive network of people. She's just retired recently, and she has no time left. Like, zero time, because she's always with her friends and her social groups. So I think that's a really good advice. So here's another situation for you, and I think I'm starting to get there. Kind of putting the pieces together. I'm warming up to the idea of going networking a little bit. But one thing that I'm slightly cringy at, and for context, I've got a 4.5-year-old girl, and she's brilliant at breaking the ice. So we'll go down, we'll get to play, we'll go down in a minute, we're going to play some tennis, we'll do some cool stuff. And if there's another girl, like boy, similar age, she'll go, hi, do you want to be friends? And like, it's completely natural, right? And she's now connecting with everyone. We're getting a social circle for her. We're meeting all the parents. It's a great way of connecting as an adult. So I think that's a good one. But for me, as an adult, to go up and say, hey, my name's Dan, do you want to be friends? Just feels weird. But it kind of is what we're trying to do, especially if we're trying to break into new groups or, like I said, move to a new area. So is there any advice you've got on how to get over that feeling of it's a bit weird, because we haven't done it since we were 4 years old?
It's always going to be a bit weird. And here's the thing, and a lot of people, introverts especially, get tripped up with this, is if they walk up to somebody and they're rude to them or they don't like them. And it's like, okay, stop. Don't think everyone because I think the immediate default is everyone gets imposter syndrome and everyone goes and, and says, I don't deserve to be here. If you're in a room with 50 to 100 other people and one person doesn't like you, there are 49 to 99 other people that you can talk to. So one, don't let that person derail you. Two, I always like to ask, and especially if it's a networking event, what brought you here tonight? Just start with that simple question, because you're all there for some common purpose. If it's an industry event, you're all in the same industry. If it's a networking event, it may be a networking event for professionals in their 30s. Everyone's between 30 and 40. They're probably all in their, they're rising in their careers, but they're not, at the top yet. You can find those commonalities and start with that question as to, what brought you here? Not why, because why is a little judgmental, but what brought you here tonight? Or, how are you tied? Like if you're at a nonprofit event, how are you tied to this organization? Because sometimes it may not be, like with something like that, they may not be involved with the nonprofit, but their friend may have invited them as their +1. There's lots of those things. So really kind of look at the type of event it is and do that. But for networking, there's going to be a commonality. Whatever that commonality is, lead with that question. And you're saying, what brought you here tonight? So you're having them do the work. And again, people like to talk about themselves. So it's really not work for anybody, especially if you're an introvert and you see that someone, especially if you're observing, you're seeing someone engage with a lot of other people, they're going to chat with you if you ask an interesting question. I mean, a lot of it is just paying attention to your surroundings and the room around you. That's
a great opening question as well. Yeah, what brought you here? Because again, we all have assumptions that people are there for a particular reason potentially, but it's interesting. Like I've been to events again with my wife, and I'm there as a +1, or she'll come with me and she'll be the +1. And so it's really interesting why people turn up, and the mix of people that turn up to these places is often quite spectacular. But that question, like what brought you here, is just really easy. It's an easy like conversation starter, right? It could go anywhere. You don't know. Just be open to the conversation, and again, if they reciprocate, then it starts the conversation going, right, and it becomes a little bit more two-way. Okay. Yeah, really interesting. Okay, so now I'm definitely warming up and thinking I've got to go to some events and bits and pieces. What do you find is how do I be really like successful with events? Because is it, and by the way, do people still use business cards? You'll have to answer that one in a minute, because I'm trying to think of what does success look like? If I'm a salesperson, and I know what success like, it's qualified leads, it's qualified engagements. I'm trying to connect with as many people and then have conversations afterwards. But if you're looking at your success rate for an event, how would you define success, and how do you ensure that you kind of make the event successful?
Success is, to me, success is the opportunity that comes from it. So it may not necessarily lead to a sale. And you have to remember, relationships take time to build. If you invest in them and you make one good new connection, that to me is enough. That for me is enough of success. You're not going to go to a networking event and close a sale. And anyone who does that is pretty much the B that you're talking about. And they're the people that people are going to want to avoid like the plague. They're just going to, just stay, stay as far away from them as they possibly can. So, and the thing is that if you learn information, that's success. If you know more about your industry at the end of the night than you did walking in, then it was worth your time. So it's not just about the connections, it's also about what you learn. So it's more than just closing a sale or making a best friend. I go to 2,000 events. I can't have 2,000 best friends. I can't, that can't be a goal for me. So, a lot of it is I'm just going to take in information. If there's someone really interesting that I'm having a great conversation with, at the end, I never say, can I have your? I always say, can we exchange? Mm-hmm. Because that way it's a symbiotic relationship. Because if you say, can I have your, that's more you want something. But if I say, can we exchange, it feels like much more of a two-way relationship and a two-way communication. So if you are going to get somebody's contact information, make sure that it's we and not I, you, because we establishes the connection. And I don't know if any of your listeners know about the primacy and recency effect, but people tend to remember what you first said and what you last said, and they'll remember bits and pieces of in the middle. And if you end with we, people will remember, oh, this is a person that's, was interested in me. He wanted my information, but he also wanted me to give his information. And then that way we can just kind of see where this partnership, this collaboration, this relationship, this friendship, whatever it is, goes.
Yeah, I'm starting to get that exchange detail. So, okay, with the daughter, we're in the playground. Okay, thank you, Munchkin. So again, all the time. But we were in the playground the other day, and there was a woman speaking Czech next to us. I'm good enough to recognize it being spoken, not good enough to speak it very well yet. And I was like, oh, hey, we're in Czech Republic, and so we started talking, and she's got kids, blah, blah, blah. So we exchanged these. I was like, oh, and that seems very natural. I'm starting to get that in kind of the parenting group. It seems real. Very comfortable, but it literally was that. It's like, would you like to exchange details? I was like, yeah, of course we would. Like in that situation, I'm not just going to take your details and hope that you're going to wait for me to call or text or something along those lines. So it makes a lot of sense. And actually, in that professional environment as well, I like the way you phrased it. I used to talk about, if you do pitch and you are going from a sales perspective, it's never sell to the individual. Because if I'm talking to you, Rob, and I'm like, hey, Rob, would you like to buy this thing? It's like, it's pressurized. And, even if I do like it, I don't want to buy it because I'm here for an event. And like, how do I get out of this situation immediately? So what I would always say to people is, hey, is there anyone that you can think of that might find this useful or interesting? It's to kind of take the pressure off of a direct close and do things kind of a little bit more indirectly. But I like that, do you like to, would you like to exchange details? It's a really nice twist on things and making it a comfortable ending to that conversation.
Absolutely. And, it takes practice. I will say that it's not something that you can get on the first tryout. And I will tell you, and this is something that really does get people tripped up. Don't dwell on something you may have said that's out of turn or bad or a faux pas. And I will tell you, because I write about events a lot. So I maybe have a little bit more of a microscope on in terms of like what an event host might think, that if they see something bad happen and they come up to me and they apologize and apologize and apologize, they didn't need to do that, because odds are I wouldn't remember it 15 minutes later. But if you come up to me and give me this detailed explanation as to why it happened, then, as Nora Ephron says, everything's copy. Then it's copy for me. And I don't need that. I don't want that type of stuff to be copy. I want the good things to be copy, not the mistakes that happen. There is no such thing as a perfect event. There is no such thing as a perfect guest. There's no such thing as a perfect host. Everyone's a work in progress with that. So that's a really important thing for everyone to keep in mind when they're going to events. Give yourself a break.
I love that. There's no such thing as a perfect guest, but I'm guessing there is an imperfect guest. So is there? You talked about faux pas. I've definitely tasted shoe leather before. Like, had put my foot in my mouth for sure. I'll tell you a howler offline, but it went down like a ton of bricks. Obviously, there's no perfect guess, but what are some of the big mistakes that people make that we can obviously avoid at events? Is there anything that you say, right, definitely don't do these certain things at events?
So do not bring an additional guest who you did not RSVP for. That is first and foremost. A good host, if there are people that fall out, they will send you a text that day saying, if you want to bring someone else, bring somebody else. But don't walk in with somebody, because when people plan for an event, and especially a networking event, they are planning for a certain number of people to go. They have a certain amount of beverages. They have a certain amount of food sometimes. And you bringing additional people takes that away from people who are already existing guests. The other thing, and this is a post-COVID thing, RSVP and show up. And I've done events, I've gone to events, I've hosted events where people will not RSVP and show up, and then people will RSVP saying they're going as like a show of solidarity and support. That doesn't translate and convey to a good event. So if you're going to RSVP, show up. And I know you can't with every single invitation, but I always try to decline whenever possible. I do get too many. But if it's anyone that I even have a remote semblance of a working relationship with, and it doesn't feel like a spam email, I will reply and decline, and politely decline and just say, thank you for thinking of me. I'm sorry I'm not able to attend. But RSVPing is so key and so important, because when people RSVP, the host is able to put on a better event, which means you're going to have more fun. And that means you're going to have better feelings. And that's really, at the end of the day, I have a friend named Heidi Marquez Smith, and she told me this once. People aren't going to remember what they had to drink or even who they talked to, but they will remember how that event made them feel. And if you leave it with a good feeling, you're going to want to be invited back to that. You're going to want to go to it again. And if you're a good guest, host will spot who a good guest is. They'll invite you back. And especially if it's a good party or a good networking event, or maybe one that's harder to get into because it's more of an invitation-only group, when you show up as the best version of yourself, opportunities will open up for you in ways that you would never expect.
Okay, so here I'm going to challenge you. I'm starting to come into ideas now, but you mentioned there about kind of closed groups. Now, oftentimes people will want to move into new areas. If I'm a salesperson, maybe I want to crack a new account territory or something along those lines. Or if I'm trying to change career, I want to connect with a group of people that I'm not really connected with. Or maybe I want to elevate my career, and actually the next level up is kind of ring fenced and all those kind of things. I need to find a way to get in. Is there a way to, like you've seen, that works for getting into these kind of more closed groups? Or do you have any advice for people that want to connect with these, like you say, these invitation-only events and actually go along as a guest?
Absolutely. So here's what I will say. So basically, we're going to go back to kind of what we were talking about at the beginning of the segment here about getting involved in your community. So one way that you can do that to elevate your career is, instead of volunteer for a couple of years, then ask to join the board, or then inquire about joining the board, because then you're going to have a lot of people. And some boards are smaller, some are 10 or 15 or 20, but if you know of a board out there in your community that has 30 or 40 or 50 board members, I know that seems overwhelming, but you'd be amazed at how many nonprofits have those. Ask to join that, because then you can find a mentor, perhaps in a different industry or the same industry. And a lot of those types of organizations, a lot of nonprofits, a lot of top ones, they'll list their board members, and oftentimes they'll list where they work. So it's a really good way for you to be like, okay, you know what, there's people in this industry, and there's also people in this other industry I want to go to. So it could be, am I just unhappy with my job or the company I'm at, or am I really unhappy with the industry? And that, when you show up like that, it gives you those other opportunities and options. And I see it all the time. And it never ceases to amaze me when two people I've known for 15 years, who I've never been in the same room with at the same time, show up together at something. And it actually happened 2 or 3 times this past spring. And they were on this other board of this newer nonprofit, but in both instances. And it, it just goes to show that when you show up and you show up wanting to be there, you get access to other people, and those people will invite you to those other types of events where there are, CEOs there of major companies. There are, if you're a founder, private equity people that are, that are at that particular event. A lot of it is that. And I will tell you, so I got connected with someone who's who's pretty high up in the technology field in Austin, who just sent me a LinkedIn friend request because we had like 40 people in common. And they were very random all throughout, not just this community that I'm in Austin, but kind of all over the place. And he was like, I need to know you. I don't know why, but let's gather. And we did. And I got 2 opportunities out of it because we did that. So some of it is, look at your social media networks. And if you've got a couple dozen connections with somebody and you think they can further your career, there's enough common denominators there. But if you have 2, 3, 5, 6 connections, that it's like, maybe I'm going to reach out and see if this person will meet me for a coffee, because there's going to be a lot of common denominators if you have that many people in common. And it's almost like peeling an onion to kind of figure, to find out what those are. And that's actually kind of what's fun about it.
Brilliant. Rob, this has been fascinating. And I love the ideas, the different ways of expanding network. Again, I had this idea that I was going to have to wake up early, go and drink black coffee and eat bacon rolls and just do my 20-second business pitch. I'm glad that isn't the only route to connecting with people in the city, and you've brought that to life. And as I mentioned at the start, our social network, it drives the expectations we have for ourselves. It puts so much positive pressure on us to achieve and move in the direction we want to move. So we need to curate this very carefully, and I think you've given us some great tips. You mentioned just offline that you've got a few tips of just how to exit excellent conversations, not so excellent conversations, that you're willing to give to listeners who've made it this far. So how can people find that and find out more about you?
So they can go to eventmindset.com, and I have a cheat sheet called 6 Graceful Ways to Exit Any Conversation. So you'll get some great tips and insights on that. And then you can find me on LinkedIn or Instagram at Rob Giardinelli.
Brilliant. Rob, I'm glad you didn't have to use any of those 6, and we've made it just because I would have seen you in action then and exiting this. But this has been great. And thank you, like I said, again, for sharing some of the ideas and practical tactics on how we can connect, be intentional, and really build the social circle that we want and need to have for us to move to the next level. So appreciate your advice today.
Thank you, Dan. It was a pleasure to be here, and I had a blast talking with you.